What if I told you that feeling just completely exhausted after 30 minutes at a loud party has absolutely nothing to do with your social skills.
Right.
And it has everything to do with how your physical body processes a single chemical. Because usually when we talk about being drained by social interaction, we treat it as this, personality flaw.
Yeah, totally.
We tell ourselves we just need to try harder or be more outgoing or somehow fix this broken part of our character.
Which is, well, it is the baseline assumption in our society, right? Yeah. Extroversion is treated as the default healthy model of human behavior. And anything that deviates from that baseline is just seen as an error in the code.
Okay, let's unpack this because today's deep dive is entirely about dismantling that exact assumption. We're looking at excerpts from a really fascinating book called The Thriving Introvert by Thibaut Meurisse. And our mission for this deep dive is to completely stop viewing introversion as a social defect. If you've ever felt guilty for needing to leave a gathering early, we want to shift your perspective away from this idea of a psychological shortcoming and instead look at the hard biological realities. We're going to explore the distinct physiological differences, the actual strengths of being an introvert, and ultimately how to optimize this specific operating system.
It's a critical shifting perspective, especially when you consider how much unnecessary suffering the current model causes. I mean, the author himself is a prime example of this.
Right.
He writes about how for years he would go to networking events or parties and try his absolute hardest to be the life of the room. He'd force himself to mingle, project high energy, and within 5 minutes he'd be completely depleted.
Wow.
Yeah, he'd zone out, become quiet, and essentially just turn invisible to the rest of the room.
And he actually writes that he felt so defeated by this cycle that he went home and literally Googled how to become more interesting.
Yeah.
He just assumed he was boring. He assumed there was something fundamentally broken about his personality because he couldn't sustain that energetic performance.
Which is a heartbreaking yet incredibly common experience.
Yeah.
But it is completely based on a flawed premise.
Yeah.
The core difference between introversion and extroversion isn't a measure of how interesting you are, or your charisma, or even how much you like other people. It is firmly rooted in genetics.
Right.
It's a biological blueprint that dictates, on a cellular level, how a human being creates and consumes emotional energy.
So we aren't just talking about a psychological preference here. We are talking about physical hardware.
Absolutely physical. To understand this, we have to look at how neurotransmitters function in the brain, specifically regarding how we feel rewarded and alert.
Okay.
Extroverts and introverts literally rely on entirely different chemical pathways. Extroverts are highly dependent on dopamine.
The reward chemical.
Exactly. Dopamine is that famous reward chemical, and it is closely linked to the sympathetic nervous system. That's the part of the nervous system responsible for the adrenaline-fueled fight-or-flight response.
Wait, so extroverts are literally relying on the fight or flight system just to feel normal and energized on a Tuesday night?
Exactly. I know it sounds extreme to call a cocktail party a fight or flight scenario, but physiologically, extroverts require that external stimulation to get their dopamine hit.
Wow.
They need activity, novelty, risk-taking, loud environments, and rapid-fire social interaction to ramp up that adrenaline. That external friction is what triggers their reward center and makes them feel awake and alive.
So extroverts are essentially like wind-up toys.
Yeah.
They require the external world to crank them up to function.
Yeah.
But introverts are fundamentally different. They're more like solar panels. They just need to sit quietly to charge.
That is an excellent way to visualize the mechanism. Because while extroverts are constantly chasing dopamine, introverts are relying on an entirely different primary neurotransmitter, acetylcholine. And acetylcholine is deeply connected to the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the exact opposite of fight or flight. It's the rest and digest side of the house.
And how does acetylcholine actually feel in the body? Like, what is the physical mechanism there?
Well, while dopamine provides a rush of euphoria that makes you want to move and speak and engage, acetylcholine triggers a deeply relaxed, focused alertness.
Interesting.
When an introvert's brain releases acetylcholine, it physically slows their heart rate. It lowers their blood pressure. It signals the muscles to relax.
Oh.
Yeah, that is why staring out a window or reading a book or deeply contemplating a single idea actually feels physically pleasurable to an introvert. They are getting a powerful chemical reward for conserving energy and focusing inward.
They are auto-stimulating.
Precisely.
Yeah.
They don't need the external environment to provide the friction their internal processes provide it. So when you take an introvert whose nervous system is optimized for acetylcholine and low stimulation, and you drop them into a highly stimulating environment like a loud party or a chaotic open-plan office,
They don't get energized.
no, their systems immediately get overloaded.
I love the biological clarity here, but let's push on the evidence a bit.
Sure.
How do we definitively know this is hardwired nervous system sensitivity and not just people self-reporting that they prefer quiet rooms? Like, how do we measure that biological threshold?
We can measure it quite literally, and the foundational proof goes back decades. There is a classic study from 1967 known as the Eysenck lemon juice experiment. A researcher named Hans Eysenck wanted to objectively measure baseline sensory arousal without relying on subjective questionnaires.
Right.
So he took a group of identified introverts and a group of extroverts, and he simply placed a few drops of lemon juice on their tongues. He then measured exactly how much saliva each person produced in response to that exact same sour stimulus.
Because salivation is an involuntary nervous system response. You can't fake it.
Exactly. It bypasses conscious preference entirely. And the results were undeniable. The introverts produced significantly more saliva than the extroverts.
Just from a few drops of lemon juice.
Yes. It proved that introverts have a fundamentally higher baseline of arousal. Their nervous systems react far more strongly and intensely to the exact same physical input. The extroverts needed more of the sour stimulus just to register the same physiological reaction.
So if an introvert's nervous system goes into overdrive over a few simple drops of lemon juice, what actually happens to their brain when they're forced into a truly chaotic, multi-sensory environment?
Right.
That's what the volume experiment looked at, which the author brings up in the text.
Yeah, that one is fascinating.
Researchers had introverts and extroverts play a really complex word game that required heavy cognitive load and trial and error. They put headphones on the participants, played background noise, and told them to adjust the volume to whatever level helped them concentrate best.
And the choices they made perfectly align with their neurotransmitter profiles. The extroverts, on average, cranked the background noise up to 72 decibels. Yeah, they needed that loud auditory friction to stimulate their dopamine and stay alert. The introverts turned the noise all the way down to 55 decibels to allow their acetylcholine to work without interference.
But the real insight is what happened when the researchers intervened. Under their self-selected conditions, both groups performed the word game equally well. They were optimized.
Right.
But then the researchers swapped the volumes. They forced the extroverts to play at the quiet 55 decibels, and they forced the introverts to play at the loud 72 decibels. And both groups completely tanked their scores.
Yeah.
They both needed significantly more attempts to solve the game.
What's fascinating here is the symmetry of the failure. The extroverts were literally understimulated by the quiet. Without that 72 decibel dopamine trigger, their brains couldn't maintain the focus required to solve the puzzles. They were starved of input. The introverts, on the other hand, were utterly overstimulated by the noise. Their high arousal nervous systems were processing the 72 decibels so intensely that it consumed all their cognitive bandwidth. Their brains basically short-circuited.
It is entirely a matter of neurological bandwidth. And this is exactly why we wanted to do this deep dive. If you are listening to this and you have ever felt completely exhausted, just drained to your core in a crowded room, it is vital to understand that you aren't socially inept.
Absolutely.
Your nervous system is quite literally maxed out. You have hit your biological limit for sensory processing, just like a computer freezing when you open too many intense programs at once.
But because society sees that physical overload happen in real time, they see the introvert shutting down, growing quiet, or pulling away from the group, they almost always misdiagnose the symptom. They slap an entirely different, highly stigmatized label on it, which is shyness.
Yes. And the author points out that even introverts get this wrong about themselves, which only adds to the confusion. It is crucial we define the difference here. Shyness is fundamentally driven by fear. It's rooted in a lack of self-confidence and a deep anxiety about negative judgment from others. Introversion, structurally, has absolutely nothing to do with fear. It is purely about how you manage your emotional energy battery.
It is a difference between desperately wanting to speak, but being too terrified of the crowd to do it, versus having absolutely no fear of speaking, but simply lacking the energy to engage, or calculating that the interaction just isn't worth the biological cost.
The book features a highly memorable anecdote that illustrates this distinction perfectly. It's the story of Brian Little, a brilliant former psychology lecturer at Harvard University.
Oh, this story is amazing.
It is. By all outward metrics, he won the 3M Teaching Fellowship, which is an incredibly prestigious award. His students absolutely loved him. He was famous for ending his university lectures with standing ovations.
Right.
He would make jokes. He would pace the stage. He would even sing during his classes. On paper, he sounds like the ultimate textbook extrovert. But internally, he was deeply, profoundly introverted.
His public persona in that lecture hall was essentially a highly calibrated performance, one that required massive amounts of his limited energy reserves.
Right. And the story goes that because he was so engaging, Professor Little was invited to the Royal Military College Saint-Jean to give a speech to a large group of military officers. He delivered this incredibly dynamic, high-energy speech, and he absolutely crushed it. The officers loved it so much they invited him back every single year.
Yeah.
But there was a catch. After the intense morning speech, the officers always expected him to join them for a long, loud networking lunch. And for Professor Little, this was a biological nightmare.
Oh, sure.
He had to deliver another complex lecture that same afternoon, and his battery was already flashing red from the morning performance. So to escape the lunch, he literally invented a fake passion for ship design.
He lied to military officers about boats.
He completely fabricated it. He would tell the officers, I would love to join you for lunch, but I simply must go take a solitary walk along the Richelieu River to admire the local ship designs.
But that's hilarious.
And he used this excuse every single year just to get an hour of silence to recharge his battery for the afternoon. But then one year, the venue for the speech changed.
Oh, no.
There was no river, there were no boats, panic sets in. And to escape the mandatory networking lunch and get his quiet time, this brilliant, award-winning Harvard lecturer literally barricaded himself inside a bathroom stall just to sit in total silence.
It's a slightly comical image, but it speaks to a profound physiological reality.
I get the need for energy preservation, but I have to play devil's advocate here. Barricading yourself in a bathroom stall to avoid colleagues sounds like a maladaptive coping mechanism.
Right.
At what point does protecting your energy just become a convenient cover story for untreated social anxiety? How do we clinically separate the two in a situation like that?
It is a vital distinction to make, and the diagnostic line comes down entirely to motivation.
Motivation, okay.
Yeah, Professor Little wasn't hiding in that bathroom stall because he was intimidated by the military officers. He wasn't experiencing a panic attack about their judgment or what they thought of his speech. His behavior was 100% driven by a calculated need for energy preservation.
Yeah.
He knew he had to deliver another high-stakes lecture that afternoon. He had spent his entire morning acting like an extrovert on stage, aggressively depleting his acetylcholine and his parasympathetic reserves.
Right.
He urgently needed an environment with absolute zero sensory input, which happened to be a quiet bathroom stall, to return his nervous system to its baseline state. If it were social anxiety, the fear would have prevented the morning speech entirely.
That brings up a fascinating concept from the text, which is the acting limit. Introverts are perfectly capable of acting like extroverts. They can deliver incredible keynote speeches, they can host huge events, they can network a room beautifully, but they are operating on a borrowed battery.
Yes, exactly.
They can only sustain that extroverted performance for a limited time before their biology demands that they rest.
Exactly. And because our broader culture doesn't understand this strict biological limit, it pathologizes the need for rest. Because an introvert can act outgoing for an hour, society expects them to be able to do it for 8 hours and assumes they are just being difficult when they withdraw.
Because we can act that way, society expects it as the default. And here's where it gets really interesting. The author highlights how deeply this anti-introvert bias is baked into the very foundation of our culture. He actually pulls dictionary definitions in the book. If you look up the accepted synonyms for introvert in Webster's dictionary, you get words like brooders, egoists, narcissists, and lone wolves.
It is genuinely staggering to hear words laden with so much moral judgment associated with a simple neurological baseline.
Crazy.
And the pathologizing goes far beyond dictionaries. The source material notes that in 2010, there was a serious formal proposal to include introversion in the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders.
Wait, you mean they actively debated classifying up to 50% of the human population as having a psychiatric disorder simply because their nervous systems prefer a quiet room over a loud one?
Yes. The underlying logic was that a lack of desire to constantly socialize was a symptom of a disordered mind.
That is wild.
The proposal was eventually rejected, thankfully, but the fact that it was even considered by leading psychiatric bodies shows how profoundly misunderstood this operating system is. Extroversion is heralded as the gold standard of mental health and productivity, and introversion is viewed as a deviation that requires curing.
Which feeds directly into all the societal myths the author completely dismantles.
Yeah.
Like the persistent myth that introverts lack social skills.
Right.
They don't. Because they are highly sensitive to nuance and energy, they are often incredibly observant, empathetic listeners. Or the myth that they simply don't like to talk. Put an introvert in a one-on-one conversation about a complex topic they're deeply passionate about, and you might not be able to get them to stop talking.
And perhaps the most damaging myth of all, the idea that introverts don't care about people. There is a brilliant quote in the source material from author Lori Helgo that addresses this perfectly. She says, let's clear one thing up. Introverts do not hate small talk because we dislike people. We hate small talk because we hate the barrier it creates between people.
That is incredibly precise. Small talk is all breath and no depth. It's rapid-fire sensory input without any meaningful connection. Introverts want depth. And honestly, it highlights a massive irony in those dictionary definitions. Society calls the introvert an egoist or a narcissist because they want to pull away and be alone.
Yeah.
But if you look at the biology we just discussed, it's the extrovert who actually requires the constant attention and interaction of other people to generate their own dopamine. The introvert is entirely self-sustaining.
It is a remarkable paradox, but because the culture heavily rewards the extroverted model in schools, in corporate environments, in media, introverts often internalize that judgment and suffer from what the author calls the I should syndrome.
Oh, this internal monologue is so real. I should talk more in this meeting. I should be enjoying this loud party. I should stay until the very end so I don't look rude. I should have something witty to say right now.
Exactly.
It creates this massive, unnecessary layer of guilt and psychological suffering on top of already feeling physically drained by the environment.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the I should syndrome is essentially a chronic form of self-gaslighting. You are demanding that your biological hardware run software it wasn't designed for, and then blaming yourself when the system crashes.
So if we are biologically wired this way, and society is constantly telling us we should be different, how do we actually bridge that gap without burning out? Like, how do we take back control?
Well, the first step in optimizing your life as an introvert is realizing that you do not owe anyone your limited social energy. The author makes a very sharp observation about interaction dynamics. When a highly extroverted person corners you at an event and talks endlessly at you, they are literally using you as a tool to recharge their own dopamine battery.
So when an extrovert corners an introvert for a one-sided hour-long chat, it's essentially an unequal energy exchange.
Right.
The extrovert is actively feeding on the interaction, while the introvert is being bled dry.
Precisely. And expecting the introvert to just sit there and endure that massive energy drain out of a sense of societal politeness is, objectively speaking, quite selfish on the part of the extrovert. You wouldn't force an extrovert to sit in solitary confinement for 3 hours just because it makes you feel more comfortable, yet we demand introverts sit in loud, exhausting environments constantly.
That realization alone gives you so much permission to protect your bandwidth. There's this great story the author shares about a personal triumph he had at a work party once he understood this.
Oh, I like this one.
There was this sudden lull in the group conversation, that awkward silence that makes extroverts panic. And a colleague practically demanded that he jump in and say something to fill the void. And instead of panicking or forcing some small talk, he just calmly replied, "I don't have anything to say. And to be honest, I like the silence."
That is the ultimate mastery of introversion. It is unapologetic, and it highlights a core mechanical difference in how these two types process the world. Introverts internalize. They prefer to take complex problems inside their own minds, turn them over in silence, process the data, and then present a fully formed thought.
Right.
Extroverts externalize. They literally think by speaking. They formulate and refine their ideas through the physical act of talking it out interactively. Neither method is inherently superior. They are simply different mechanical processes.
Okay, so bringing this all together for our listener, how do they take this biological validation and practically apply it to their life tomorrow?
It comes down to identifying and ruthlessly protecting what the author calls your sweet spot. You have to start managing your energy budget like a corporate CFO. When you are engaging with others, you must know your exact threshold.
Okay.
For the author, his sweet spot is about 2 hours at a social gathering. After 2 hours, he physically feels his battery deplete, he starts feeling bored, and he feels like he's becoming boring to others.
It's like a smartphone that's in an area with a terrible cellular signal. If you put an introvert in a highly stimulating, loud room, they are constantly searching for equilibrium, burning through their battery reserve twice as fast just to maintain basic functionality.
That is a perfect analogy. And when your battery hits zero, you have to leave. You don't apologize for it. You don't invent a story about ship designs. You just use polite, honest exits. I prefer intimate gatherings. I'm going to head out. Or simply, I need to go recharge.
And what about managing the other side of the equation? When they are alone?
Well, the sweet spot applies there too. Introverts can and absolutely should enjoy their solitude to recharge their acetylcholine and let their nervous systems rest. But the author warns you cannot isolate for so long that basic everyday social interactions become an overwhelming ordeal.
Right.
Even introverts need to socialize to avoid getting trapped in negative internal feedback loops. The goal isn't total isolation. The goal is highly strategic, energy-conscious engagement.
Strategic engagement. You plan where you spend your energy rather than letting the environment dictate it for you. So to summarize all this for the listener, introversion is not a broken version of extroversion. It is a completely different, completely valid biological operating system. You run on different chemicals, you require different environments to thrive, and you don't need to apologize for needing to recharge any more than you need to apologize for being left-handed or needing glasses. It is simply the way you were built.
This raises an important question, though, when we consider how modern society is structured. If roughly 50% of the human population are introverts, people who do their absolute best, deepest, most innovative thinking in quiet solitude, and who actively struggle to generate complex ideas on the spot in loud groups.
Yeah.
How much brilliant innovation are we currently losing in the modern corporate world by forcing everyone into loud, open-plan offices and mandatory group brainstorming sessions?
That is an incredible thought to leave on. We are literally designing our schools and workspaces to be actively hostile to half of the world's brain power, all because we misunderstood a biological baseline. But the good news is, you now have the blueprint. If you've been looking at your social exhaustion like a personality flaw, thinking you need a cure, you're looking at the wrong map. You aren't broken. You're just a solar panel trying to operate in a wind tunnel. Step out of the wind, find a quiet ray of sun, and let yourself recharge. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.